NASA needing a heavier vehicle for ISS Deorbit highlights why current Falcon-class lift falls short for large end-of-life missions. This is SpaceX Daily, episode 58. NASA has determined that Falcon 9 payload capacity is insufficient to deliver the mass required for controlled ISS deorbit. The agency must therefore source a vehicle with greater lift capability for the final disposal maneuver. Reports indicate the deorbit hardware and propellant load exceed Falcon 9 performance margins even in expendable configuration. This requirement directly affects planning for the station's retirement timeline. The decision follows engineering assessments of total mass that must be delivered in a single maneuver to ensure safe re-entry of the full station structure. SpaceX completed its 50th launch from Florida's Space Coast in 2026. The milestone reflects sustained high cadence at Cape Canaveral and Kennedy Space Center pads. Multiple Falcon 9 missions contributed to the total, including both commercial and government payloads. The count demonstrates operational throughput at the two active Florida sites. Each launch used the same family of vehicles operating from separate pads with independent turnaround cycles. The U.S. Space Force awarded SpaceX a $1.6 billion contract covering multiple Falcon 9 missions. The agreement secures launch capacity for national security payloads through the late 2020s. Missions will use both existing and future manifest slots. The contract adds to prior Space Force task orders for Falcon vehicles. Payloads include classified satellites and experimental national security demonstrations. SpaceX will transition ground transport for Crew 13 from mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles to Tesla Cybertrucks. The change begins at the Crew Access Arm and extends to recovery operations. Cybertrucks offer higher speed and lower maintenance for crew movement on the pad. The shift aligns with broader fleet modernization at the launch site. The first operational use is planned for the crew handover and post-landing transport sequence. The Starfall program provides independent validation of re-entry technologies developed by external teams. It creates a competitive pathway for hardware that must survive orbital return. Early participants can use SpaceX test infrastructure to qualify designs. The effort expands access to flight-proven re-entry data. The program accepts hardware from multiple vendors and schedules dedicated test flights on existing Falcon or Starship vehicles. Musk stated SpaceX selected Nvidia GPUs exclusively for their performance advantages. An optimized Vera Rubin NVL72 rack is scheduled for orbital deployment in 2027. The system is intended for space-based AI workloads. No alternative GPU suppliers were mentioned for these missions. The choice aligns with ongoing work to qualify high-density racks for the radiation and thermal environment of low Earth orbit. Nvidia will supply the StarMind AI One orbital compute payload under a SpaceX contract. The hardware integrates GPU clusters designed for satellite-based inference. Integration work focuses on power, thermal, and radiation hardening for the orbital environment. Launch is planned on a future Falcon or Starship mission. The payload is sized to fit standard satellite bus interfaces while meeting strict mass and power budgets. New thermal tiles are designed to reject heat directly at the compute source inside orbital data center concepts. The approach avoids large fluid loops by conducting waste heat to external radiators. Early prototypes target high-density GPU racks where local hotspots limit sustained operation. The tiles form part of a broader effort to make satellite-based AI hardware viable. Testing will measure conductivity under vacuum and thermal cycling conditions representative of low Earth orbit. Observers on our SpaceX noted that Ship 41 has entered testing ahead of Flight 14, while recovery teams continue work on the intact Ship 40 in the Indian Ocean. The parallel activity shows Starbase maintaining separate vehicle flows for upper stage hardware. Recovery operations for Ship 40 mark the first time crews have retrieved an intact Starship upper stage from the open ocean. Community posts highlighted Falcon 9 booster B106334 completing another flight, with reuse statistics continuing to climb on the same core. The booster has now flown more than 30 missions without structural replacement of primary tanks. Reddit users discussed the planned AST Space Mobile Bluebird 11 to 13 mission scheduled for overnight liftoff from Florida. The satellites target direct-to-cell coverage expansion and will ride on a dedicated Falcon 9. Worth keeping an eye on, a portfolio manager stated that SpaceX's long-term trajectory hinges on proving reusable Starship operations at scale. Without demonstrated rapid reuse, the company's ability to meet stated cadence and cost targets remains unproven. The assessment notes that current Falcon economics cannot substitute for Starship-class performance on high-mass or high-frequency missions. Resolution depends on upcoming flight test outcomes and successful recovery of both the Super Heavy booster and ship upper stage on the same flight. On the AI front, SpaceX will fly an optimized Vera Rubin NVL-72 rack on an orbital mission next year, according to Musk's statement on exclusive Nvidia GPU selection. The rack will be modified for vacuum operation and radiation tolerance before integration with a Starlink-class bus. Nvidia is developing the StarMind AI-1 satellite compute payload specifically for SpaceX orbital deployment. The payload pairs Nvidia GPU modules with custom power conditioning and thermal interfaces sized for satellite buses. Cursor open-sourced its Mixture of Kittens deterministic MoE training megakernel optimized for GB300 NVL-72 racks. The release targets training throughput on the same class of hardware planned for the 2027 orbital demonstration. From an engineering standpoint, orbital data center concepts face a fundamental heat rejection limit where every watt of compute power eventually becomes waste heat that must leave the spacecraft through radiation. Traditional fluid loops add mass, complexity, and single-point failure modes, so designers are exploring direct conduction tiles that move heat from GPU dies to external radiator surfaces with minimal intermediate hardware. The approach collapses the thermal path length, lowering the temperature gradient required to drive the same heat flux and thereby reducing the radiator area needed for a given compute load. Early prototypes use high-conductivity ceramic metal composites bonded directly to the GPU cold plate, eliminating pumps and manifolds that would otherwise dominate subsystem mass. If the tiles achieve the targeted conductivity, the idiot index for the thermal subsystem drops because the finished assembly approaches the raw material cost of high-conductivity ceramics and metal interfaces rather than the multiplied expense of pumps, manifolds, and redundant plumbing. That reduction matters for orbital economics because every kilogram saved on the thermal system is a kilogram available for additional GPUs or propellant, directly improving the revenue per launch that an AI satellite can generate. The same tiles also simplify radiation shielding because the conductive path itself can incorporate neutron-absorbing layers without adding separate enclosures. The next engineering milestone is demonstrating sustained operation under orbital thermal cycling and radiation exposure without delamination or conductivity loss. Success would validate a path to denser on-orbit clusters and, by extension, lower the cost floor for space-based inference workloads that Starlink backhaul could serve. Ground testing will expose samples to vacuum outgassing, atomic oxygen erosion, and total ionizing dose levels representative of a multi-year mission before the first Vera Rubin NVL-72 rack flies. SPCX closed at $125.33, up 8.1% from the prior session. Before we go, recovery crews are now pulling an intact Starship upper stage from the open ocean for the first time. And that's a wrap on today's SpaceX developments. SPCX is trading at $125.33, up 8.1%. Share this with a fellow spaceflight fan if you found it useful, and subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's episode. I'm Patrick in Vancouver. See you next time. Quick tip from the network. Try models and agents for beginners next. Artificial intelligence explained simply for beginners and curious teens. Every NARA Network show is free at naranetwork.com. And on the website, every episode's visuals live in our free image gallery at naranetwork.com/gallery. royalty-free under Creative Commons, download with attribution. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.